exam. So there are quite a few new drugs, but does this mean anything? So if we look at a plot that looks at efficacy, which is the y-axis here, and tolerability is on the x-axis, and as we move up on the y-axis, that means better control, and as we move to the right on the x-axis, that means worse tolerability due to side effects. And as you can see, we're not close to the ideal. We don't have medications that completely control seizures without side effects. So in one respect, neither aspect of our seizure medications are really doing a complete job. We're not controlling seizures completely in a small group of patients with epilepsy, nor are we preventing side effects. So our drugs do bad things to our patients. So since 1990, the drugs that were in use then, approximately 1/3 of the epilepsy population were intractable to medications. And that just means that you fail multiple medications without complete seizure freedom. And remember in the slide that I just presented before that, there have been greater than 20 new medications being trialed in our patients. And you know what? It hasn't changed. So the same 1/3 of our patients aren't controlled by the seizure medications that we use. What this statistic also suggests is, I'm sure most of you have heard that there are antibiotics, and then if you give antibiotics to too many people, you get resistance, and then the antibiotic doesn't work anymore. Well, this isn't true in epilepsy because we try new drugs and the same percentage arises, suggesting that we're missing somehow a chance to control seizures in approximately 1/3 of our patients. And if you tally all the patients in the world who fit under this rubric of intractable epilepsy, there's quite a few people who have intractable epilepsy. 65 million is quite a number. And then we got this headline in 2013. And this headline, I'm sure most of you are aware of. It was telecast on CNN. And this little headline said, "Marijuana stops child severe seizures." And there's a website if you want to go on and take a look at it. It's there. Oops. And whoops, there it is. So this talks about a little girl named Charlotte who, if you look on the right, was treated with a mixture of the resins in a marijuana plant, and her seizure reductions were quite significant. It's interesting, for those of you who have read the book, which I have, remember Charlotte is the little spider, not the girl. So let's look at the real girl. And this picture is HIPAA compliant because I took it off the internet, and it's been around, and it's used by the Stanley brothers in Colorado, showing little Charlotte Figge, who is a little girl who the newscast was about, and has very bad epilepsy, but their marijuana products seem to be very helpful. So currently she's 9. She has a terrible genetic epilepsy called Dravet syndrome, which is caused by a mutation in a gene involved in sodium transmission. That's not important. What's important is it's a genetic, it's inherited, it's a terrible epilepsy. Our drugs don't work very well for it. For those of you who are familiar with Dravet syndrome, you would echo my comments. It's a terrible epilepsy syndrome. Charlotte's seizures began at 3 months of age. They tried multiple medications which weren't efficacious. And then at age 6, she was given this extract from the marijuana plant that had high CBD, which is cannabidiol, and very low THC, which is the delta-9 tetrahydrocannabidiol. That's a portion or the compound in the marijuana plant that get too high, which had very low concentrations of that. And conservatively, she had greater than 50 seizures per day, and on this extract, she went to 2 to 3 seizures a month. Very significant, and for those of us who are in the field, it was almost like it's too good to be true. And this extract was named after Charlotte, and it's Charlotte's Web, but it's actually a strain of a plant that has the connotation from a rock band called AC/DC, for those of you who are into music. So our current situation, as you can see, the little well, it's not a cartoon, it's a photograph. So is the cart before the horse? Here are the lists of medical marijuana states that it's legal. There are 24. And as you notice that in 1998, both Alaska and Washington were legal states at that point. And there are currently 4 states that are legal for recreational use. And again, it's our Alaska and Washington and Oregon. So the Northwest is highly representative of recreational marijuana use. So let me tell you a little bit about the plant so we're all on the same page. It's actually the tip of the hairs located in the female plant, and much less to extent of the leaves and the stalks, where the resin is really the portion of the plant where the cannabidiols are found. And there are over 80 of these terpenophenolic compounds in the marijuana plant. There are basically 2 major species, and although there's an argument among artesian marijuana shops, there's cannabis sativa, which I just showed you, and there's another species, cannabis indica. And cannabis indica is used for hemp, which is widely used for fibers and other things around the world. Cannabis sativa is mostly used to get you high. There's some medicinal products that have been used for quite some time from cannabis sativa, and the use of cannabis sativa actually goes back to ancient China and India for its medicinal uses. There are 2 major products in cannabis sativa, and one is the delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, and the other is a group of cannabidiols, which have a similar biochemical structure, and the most common is cannabidiol, which we call CBD. So the question is, are these 2 compounds the same? And at least in my practice, a lot of the patients who use recreational marijuana think they're the same, and they're really not. THC has bioactive properties. It has a high affinity for a particular type of receptor in the brain. CBD has no psychoactive properties. It can bind the CB1 receptor, but at very high concentrations, which are almost impossible to get in the human. And recent evidence published early last year suggests that CBD may actually bind another site on the CB1 receptor and dampen its efficacy. So for those of you who add THC to your CBD extract to get better seizure control, it's doubtful that that's really going to be beneficial. And the interesting thing is we have our own internal cannabidiol system, and I'll allude to this in a few slides. But what we're finding is that the cannabidiols are really important in multiple different aspects of our physiology. They're involved in inflammation, and they help with immune regulation in inflammation. They can alter energy metabolism. They can affect memory, mood, and our brain reward system. So just a little bit of history. CBD was first isolated by a physician named Adams in 1940, and its structure was elucidated in the early 60s by an Israeli-British group. subsequent to that, a year later, THC was isolated and characterized in 1964. And for those of you who are as old as I am and remember just as the Earth crust was cooling, this is really the height of smoking marijuana. Due to the psychoactive properties, most of the research attention focused on how this product, THC, could give you euphoria. And it was during this time that these receptors in the brain, as well as the peripheral nervous system and peripheral tissues, was really discovered in the late 1980s. And there were two types of receptors that THC bound to. One is affectionately known as CB1, and because we're not too innovative, the second one was called CB2. CB1 receptors are found in the brain and very little in the peripheral system. And oppositely, the CB2 receptors are found in peripheral tissues, mostly in the immune and in the blood-producing systems in the bone marrow. As the CB1 and CB2 receptors were discovered, it logically was thought, why should they be there? I mean, you don't have receptors anywhere in the body without a need for it. The body is very conservative and doesn't produce things that it doesn't need. So it must be needed for some physiological process. And over time, we found two major types of cannabidiols that the body produces naturally, and I've listed those two. There are probably many more, and we're finding more as time goes on. So why are they there? And if they're there, and are there only two? Well, we're finding that there are more types of receptors. Likely, at least from recent literature, it's this GPR5 receptor, which is a G-coupled receptor. That's probably going to be the most valuable receptor for CBD, although this isn't quite validated yet. And if you look at the other receptors, you can get a feel for some of the effects of marijuana. There are opiate receptors that bind endogenous and cannabidiol, also serotonin receptor, and probably many more. How these receptors act, how they interact, is something that we're just beginning to learn about. So I just wanted to show you the structures and how similar they are. On the left side of the slide in the upper left is the THC molecule. And on the upper right is the CBD molecule. You can tell there's a little bit of difference here where the epoxide portion of the structure has been broken and it's quite not the same. And in the middle of the slide in the lower are the two major endogenous cannabidiols. So why should we care? I mean, how does this really help in epilepsy? And if you read the old literature and the literature that's out there, animal studies have been pretty interesting in that both compounds, CBD and THC, seem to have similar activities as far as epilepsy. Both can act as an anti-seizure medication, but given different conditions, both can be actually proconvulsant. That's something that we clearly don't understand. Human studies haven't been well done, and we'll get to some of the reasons, but it's a little bit frustrating for those of us who have patients who are using arsenal CBD that come to our clinics. But there's some real hope, and the hope at first started with Charlotte's Web and the CNN report. But prior to that, animal studies really showed some efficacy. The way the NIH approves seizure medications is that most of the seizure medications go through a particular series of testing on animal models that are known epileptic models. to see if a compound might be anticonvulsant. And as it moves through different types of animal models, then hopefully it comes to human trial. Well, THC and CBD, as you can see on this slide, both have a pretty good history of being anticonvulsant. And this would be especially true for CBD. But there's some baggage. And the emotional baggage of marijuana is rampant. Most of us have lived through a lot of it. It's also a Scheduled I drug by the FDA. And a Schedule I drug means that it's in the same class as heroin, cocaine, which is concerning for those of us in the field, because a Scheduled I drug is very difficult to get enough compound to do really good studies with. Makes it very restrictive to get very highly purified either THC or CBD to do research with. So it limits our studies. The human data hasn't been too overwhelming, and I say this with a grain of salt because both of these studies that I'm going to talk just a little bit about are using smoked marijuana, which, as you would think, would be very high in THC. So one study looked at 215 patients with epilepsy who have smoked epilepsy and had epilepsy, smoked THC and had epilepsy. Only 7% claimed their seizures got better. The rest thought their seizures got worse, but it's not clear to us the recall by the patients whether it was accurate or not. In another study looking at another group of patients, 63 of this group of patients had epilepsy, and of the 63, 7 reported an increase in seizure freedom, 3 reported improvement, and 53 reported no effect. So the data didn't look so hot as far as the human data of smoking the marijuana that most people use to get high with. So what's this disconnection? And I think I alluded to it. It's the different concentrations of THC and CBD in the extract or the smoke product. And just to give you an example, in our clinic, we're able to get concentrations on a research basis. And if you look at ACDC, the amount of THC is very minimal compared to the level or the amount of CBD. Another grower who sells CBD extract to patients, it's completely reversed. So you have a very high concentration of THC and a very low concentration of CBD. So depending on the plant that you're using, you can see the variability in your results. And also, most studies don't note other medications, especially smoking cigarettes. Smoking cigarettes alters the serum levels of both compounds, and it can really mask any benefit. But the other studies didn't show any other recreational drugs which might alter the results. So let's assume, just for this talk, that CB1 receptors act like other endocannabinoid receptors in the brain. And it's probably true, but the data isn't quite as good for the other receptors because we're just learning about them. But CB1 receptors are found in both the type of neurons that stimulate the brain and the type of neurons that inhibit the brain. And CB1 receptors are found most highly in regions of the brain that you would think the side effect profile would fit. The hippocampus for memory, seizures, amygdala for sensation of fear and of pleasure, the frontal lobe for premotor planning and for executive function, meaning that it allows us to say this is the time to do certain things, this is the time not to do certain things, and the cerebellum, which gives control for coordination. So does it make any difference whether you have seizures or you don't have seizures? So on the left of the screen is a control mouse brain, and on the right of the screen is a mouse that has chronic epilepsy. If you look at the colors, as the colors trend from blue to red, that means that there's a higher concentration of receptors in that area. And as you can see, in the epileptic brain, CB1 receptors are very much upregulated. There's very much more numbers of CB1 receptors in the epileptic brain. That should tell us something. And that probably tells us that CB1 receptors and likely other N-cannabidiol receptors are probably upregulated in the epileptic brain for a reason. And so right now there's a disclaimer. I'm giving you my view on how I think that these receptors work in epilepsy. The data, I think, is there, but the data isn't concrete yet. So if you remember that. So most of us think that the exogenous or the cannabidiols that are being given, they're being given to a system that is overstimulated due to seizures. And the natural or in vivo cannabidiol system is being overwhelmed. So it's an abnormal system, and by adding exogenous cannabidiols, we're trying to bring the epileptic brain back toward more of a normal state. So we know that CB1 receptors are found on presynaptic synapses to a greater extent than postsynaptic. And that just means that the upstream neurons have more CB1 receptors than the downstream neurons. One. And this suggests, at least to me, that CB1 receptors or N-cannabidiol receptors are acting as regulators. And the regulators are trying to modulate a system, not to shut it down, but to modulate it. So if you view the brain, the brain has two major types of neurons: the neurons that excite and the neurons that inhibit. And in a given brain region, they should balance. You don't want to have too much excitation, and you don't want to have too much inhibition. It should be in equilibrium. But in intractable epilepsy, you have neurons that are firing way more than they should. And therefore, the other types of neurons that are trying to inhibit, the excitatory neurons, can't compensate for this excess excitatory balance. And what happens is you get neurons that fire uncontrollably, and you get seizures. Well, we think that we add, and in this case CBD, but it could be other N-cannabidiols, that what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring back the system into balance. Because there's so many more excitatory neurons, that's the neuron group that is most affected by the addition of CBD. But truth be known, we're also down-regulating a little bit of the inhibitory neurons as well. But the overall effect is to bring back into balance the excitatory and the inhibitory portions of the brain in that particular brain region that's having seizures. So this is just a cartoon. And as you can see the labels, there are two neurons. And you can see that one neuron sends out an axon, which is this thing right here, to communicate to the neuron downstream. And the way it does this is through a chemical reaction. And this is just a further cartoon. So this is one of the inhibitory neurons. And what happens is if you look at the orange portion the slide on the left side. The little triangle is the N-cannabidiol receptor. And as this neuron is firing, it releases neurotransmitters or the signals to make the downstream neuron active. And what happens is that as this is going on, the membrane components which contain the N-cannabidiol release and alter the receptor, and it starts to downregulate or control the amount of chemical release to signal the downstream neuron. And this happens both mostly at the presynaptic membrane, but also the postsynaptic membrane or the secondary neuron that it is trying to signal to. And here's just the excitatory neuron, and it's the same thing that's happening, but the excitatory neuron is much more complex. And so there are multiple different factors regulating the signaling between the upstream and the downstream neuron, but it's the same process. The N-cannabidiol receptor is modulating the amount of receptor release to excite the downstream neuron. So, how do we think that it works? So remember me talking about in a person who has epilepsy, the excitatory neurons are probably dominating that particular brain region, and the inhibitory neuron can't control it. So by adding an exogenous compound that controls the CB1 receptor or the N-cannabidiol receptor, that receptor is now stimulated to turn down the amount of neurotransmitter release. If you turn down the amount of neurotransmitter release, you essentially tone down that neuron's effect. And so in epilepsy, if you tone down the neuron that's firing too much, you're actually down-regulating the seizure response, and you're making that neuron more controllable for the inhibitory portion of trying to keep in balance the excitatory versus the inhibitory state of the brain. So our envision of how N-cannabidiols work is just like a rheostat. So just like in your home, when a temperature gets too hot, you turn down the thermostat and the ambient temperature in your house goes down. Well, in an epileptic brain, the hot centers where the seizures are going on, and if you could turn down the excitatory neurons in that region of the brain, you're toning down the epileptic portion of the brain, which means that you should be slowing down seizures. So to summarize, we think that epilepsy is this imbalance between excitatory and inhibitory neurons. This imbalance can be acted on, we think, by our drugs. Well, in cannabidiols or CBD, and maybe a little bit of THC, the verdict is still out, but unlikely, that it acts as a rheostat, and it starts to turn down the highly active epileptic neurons that are firing. So essentially it's acting like a brake. And in this case, it's acting like anti-lock brakes. So you're getting a rheostat phenomenon where you're slowly downturning the stopping of the neurons from firing too much, and you're doing it in a more controlled way. You're just not slamming on the brakes. You're putting on the brakes, and over a short period of time, you're stopping the excessive discharges of the abnormal neuron. You're not stopping it completely, but you're slowing it down, and you're modulating it probably in a better way. So, does it work? So here's a slide looking at a phase 2 GW pharmaceutical study, and my disclaimer is this has already been published, so I'm not revealing any data that's ongoing in this study. But if you look at it, these are all seizures, and if you look at the blue, light blue, dark blue lines, these are the amounts of seizure responders. So this is a very high concentration of CBD, very, very low concentration of THC. And for 58 patients, all comers, intractable epilepsy, overall, you're getting a 40% reduction in seizures. Now, this is a group who have failed everything that we can throw at them that's known to help control seizures in epilepsy. And by adding CBD, we're getting 40% more control, which to me is pretty phenomenal. And in Dravet syndrome, smaller number of patients, but as you can see on the far right-hand side of the screen, there's a 56% reduction in seizures, which is spectacular in this population. So we have data, but what are the problems with the data? One, the published data was in an open label study. What does that mean? An open label study means that everybody knows they're getting drug. And as we pretty much all know, if you really want to slow down seizures and you believe that this compound may be helpful, you may think that there are less seizures than there actually are, and that's called bias. And one of the problems of all open label studies is that you have bias. The second thing is that the other medications aren't controlled. So you don't know if the compound that you're adding and investigating is actually altering another compound that you're already taking. And that can confound the results. But the good points of this study, that there was a constant amount of CBD to THC used. So we know the product that we're using. We know, one, that it has a consistent concentration over the period of the study. The second is that this company has to have oversight in order to participate in a clinical trial. So that means that the product's tested for contaminants. The product, we know how much we're giving each patient. And the study requires a seizure diary that has to be filled out daily, meaning that the bias is reduced. So if it's going to be effective, you know that it's effective and not due to poor recall. Now, how does this compare to the over-the-counter, down-the-street marijuana shop? Well, the good points about having a local marijuana shop could be that you can walk right down there and obtain your extract. So it's easy to obtain. Studies are routinely limited to a specific type of epilepsy or specific type of genetic epilepsy, and you're limited. But if you have epilepsy, it doesn't matter if you can buy it over the counter. You can go anywhere and buy it. But there are problems. And the big problem is that there's no oversight on the product that you're getting. So the product purity may change from batch to batch. Contaminants may be present. In the Seattle area, product was pulled off the market because it had pesticides in it. That can happen. It's expensive, and there's no insurance coverage, so you're on your own. And if you're trying to make ends meet because you're dealing with 4 other seizure medications for your son or your daughter, husband or wife, that expense can be really, really just push you over the edge and you can't do it. The product may change from vendor to vendor. So if you need to go to another town on vacation, you don't know the product that you're getting. How do we dose a product that we have no control over? So how does somebody really tell you that you need 4 drops of the extract and not 10 drops of the extract? And the FDA has seen fit to still call this drug a Scheduled I drug, meaning that I can't prescribe it. No physician who has a DEA license can prescribe any marijuana product. We can, in some states, we're allowed to authorize you to buy the product, but we can't prescribe the product. So, I guess the big question is, are we shifting the horse before the cart now instead of the other way around? And I'm not so sure. I think we are, but I think it's a slow process. And if my son or daughter or wife had epilepsy, it'd be really hard to wait. And I think that's one of the problems, is that we have to wait for the trials to be done so the FDA can approve the drug. Or we have to venture out and see if the drug works, and the drug may not be pure, and it may not work because it's the wrong type of drug. So I appreciate your time. I'm sorry I couldn't be there, and certainly I'm happy to take any questions that may come up. So thank you very much for listening. Any questions? Is actually anybody there?
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, no question. I'm sorry.
Well, it doesn't sound like anybody has any questions. And I know that I'm not that good. So if you have any questions, if you could, go ahead.
So one of the things that I noticed when marijuana became legal here in Oregon, and so then I actually tried it for the first time, is THC immediately gives me seizures. But I know that I've had some mild CBD from tea, from the industrial hemp leaves. And I'm not sure it has helped with seizures, but it does help with migraine pain. And I would really like to try something, but I have no idea how to get something reasonable for me to try, if that makes sense.
No, that makes complete sense. You're talking to probably 70% of the patients that I deal with who are trying to get CBD. And unfortunately, CBD is not a major moneymaker. If you look at all the recreational marijuana shops, they're there because people want to get high. The demand for high CBD, low THC is limited to folks who have epilepsy, or folks who have migraine, or folks who have spasticity due to MS, and the market is very, very small. We test all the products that our patients take by their serum levels, and we have many patients who get a product over the internet sold by the Realm of Caring, and the levels of CBD vary all over the map. Some patients have fairly good levels of CBD. Some patients don't. Some patients have very high levels of THC as well. So right now, it's extraordinarily difficult to get a pure product. And that's what I'm noticing.
Okay, so my sense that this is still, even the people who say it's tested, you're still rolling the dice, because I know that it will give me seizures if I get too much THC. I don't want to roll those dice.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to tell you.
Okay.
There are some growers who I know that, according to my patients, the CBD level is very, very high and the THC level is very, very low. And when we test them, we get serum levels that agree with what they're being told.
Okay.
I don't know where that is because I try to stay out of the market in a sense because I don't want to lead people one way or another. My hospital doesn't allow me to do that.
Right.
But there are people out there, there are growers out there that do have a high CBD, low THC product. I don't know how to find them, but I know some of my patients do find them, so they're out there.
Okay. Well, I'm in Eugene, and some of the research labs, the labs that test for the researchers are here, so I might know the right people to ask.
Yes, I would ask.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
And you have some questions written in the online people type it too.
They're not coming up. Where do I find those?
If you have on the presentation a bubble at the top that looks like two speech bubbles,
Yes, I do.
click that, you'll see them.
Oh, I'm not seeing them. And I clicked on both.
Okay. What percentage, it turns out it's one question, what percent of neurologists would be willing to authorize a person to buy marijuana for a child with epilepsy?
It depends where you work. For instance, at my institute, our institute frowns on anybody who writes an authorization to obtain marijuana. However, there are naturopaths in our area that would be happy to write an authorization. And so far, I haven't had any family run into a problem of getting an authorization card.
Hello. Hello. It's Jessica. Dr. Hines has a question for us.
Oh, can you hear me okay? Echo. How about now? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you echo.
Yeah, I have a real deep variant.
You can?
So is there any way that I can hear the questions? Okay. Okay. Whoops. Could you type that out again, Jessica? I missed it. I thought I answered that question, Jessica, but I'll repeat it. So the question is whether a neurologist would be able to authorize the buying of medical marijuana. And I think that depends on the neurologist and where they practice. I work in a public institution that doesn't allow me to authorize the purchase of medical marijuana. But there are neurologists who are in private practice that do authorize the obtaining of medical marijuana. So I think it depends on where you practice. There were two questions. So the first question was whether or not we're conducting trials looking at CBD, and the answer to that is yes, for children who have Dravet syndrome. So you have to have Dravet syndrome and at least 4 seizures in a given month to enroll in the study. So we're one of the centers for that. And I think the second question was whether or not purified CBD would be a first-line treatment for patients with epilepsy. And truthfully, I don't know if that would be true. I think that in Dravet syndrome, it might be true. But it hasn't been used in other epilepsy syndromes to make that call. But certainly it has efficacy in multiple types of epilepsy. So, you know, I'm sure it would be used in the armamentarium of how we control epilepsy. I think another question just came up, does CBD interact with other seizure medications? And the answer to that is yes. It interacts with a lot of different seizure medications. And those other seizure medications have to be followed very closely, or you could have a lot of side effects from the other medications because of the interaction between CBD and other seizure medications. And as I mentioned during the talk, if you smoke cigarettes and marijuana interact very, very consistently, and you have to watch very closely the levels because of cigarette smoke. And in addition, secondhand cigarette smoke can do the same thing. So if you smoke around a child who's taking CBD, that cigarette smoke secondhand can alter the efficacy of CBD as well. Trying to get it off Schedule 1 has been extraordinarily difficult. The FDA just released a statement, I think it was 3 weeks ago, that they're keeping all marijuana products as Scheduled 1. They are The federal government's trying to reduce the limitations on research on CBD, but it's still a Scheduled I drug. And unfortunately, for now, that's the way it will remain. Oh, good question. How can you get more studies in Alaska? Well, interestingly, our GW pharmaceutical studies and Dravet syndrome, we allow patients from Alaska to enroll. In fact, the study will pay for your travel to come to Seattle to enroll in the study. So I think that's a good thing. In order to get clinical trials in Alaska, there has to be a physician who's willing to take on the role of a site principal investigator. That person has to obtain a Scheduled I license, which is not an easy feat. My Scheduled I license, just for an example, limits me to prescribe CBD only in the context of the 2 GW pharmaceutical trials that I'm involved in, meaning that I cannot prescribe it outside the clinical trial realm. So, that being said, for studies to start in Alaska, you need somebody who will be the site advisor, site PI. You need a center that will allow the study to occur. You need to get FDA approval for how you house your medication. So in Seattle at our hospital, it's in a safe that's bolted to the floor with a 24/7 video camera on it at all times, and there are only 4 pharmacists who are allowed to know the combination to that safe. Ridiculous, but nonetheless, that's the way it is. So that sort of thing has to start in Alaska. Do I think there are going to be more studies for other types of epilepsy? And the answer to that is yes. So within probably next 6 weeks, we'll be starting a GW pharmaceutical trial looking at tuberous sclerosis, TS, and CBD. I know the company wants to start other trials for other diseases, and they're working as hard as they can to do that. I'm not privy to those trials, so I don't know. So the question was whether or not I've seen children who have other types of epilepsy respond to marijuana. The answer to that is yes. We've had 2 patients become essentially seizure-free using again, a high CBD extract that contains very little or no THC. But we've had other patients who have tried other extracts with some help, but definitely not to the degree that we've seen in the clinical trials. So the question in Anchorage was whether or not the children that I see are on other seizure medications? And the answer to that is yes. Thus far, every child that I've seen has been on one medication at least, and most are on 2 or 3 medications when they trial CBD. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I'm sorry I couldn't be there again.
And did his neurology residency and epilepsy fellowship at the Indiana University. So please help me welcome Dr. Hines.
Okay. I've been coming back and forth to Alaska since 1992. Backpacking every year or two over here, usually in the Brooks Range. I was there with my daughter this past summer. We were up at Anatubuc Pass. And the first person I saw when I got off the plane was one of my epilepsy patients. to be passed just coincidentally. She recognized me right off. When we came back to need a place to stay, she helped us out. So it's good to have your epilepsy patients out in the bush. Yeah. The next slide. Oh, I should be talking to myself. Well, as Alexis pointed out, MC, basically in the morning, private office in the afternoon. I've been going back and forth to rural Alaska for quite some time and done quite a few field clinics. And the field clinics are basically places where we travel from A&MC out in the bush area where there's no specialty available. Neurology does that, so does cardiology, some other, OBGYN, infectious disease, a lot of other disciplines as well, which I'll talk about more. And basically the management of epilepsy, and for that matter other conditions, is different when you live in Alaska in the rural areas than it is when you live in the cities. I pay attention where my patients are from here in clinic. I might prescribe and give advice and do testing differently if somebody lives in Anchorage versus if somebody lives in, Point Hope, or especially, way out in one of the Pribilofs where they're even more isolated. Management's not the same. Patients aren't the same, and their management is not the same as well. I'll wait for the slide to get better. Can they hear me on the webcast? Do you guys know? Am I? Okay. And okay. Well, there are relatively few neurologists in the state. Probably the biggest reason is we have a relatively small population in the state. It's the second smallest state in terms of population, but the largest in terms of area. So I guess common sense would say we have the lowest density of neurologists in the United States. I guess that means that we're the least dense neurologists, right? Is that an oxymoron? I don't know. At least that's the way I like to view it. That's my own personal perception. But as a result, because there's really so few neurologists, a lot of the neurology gets taken care of by non-neurologists. You don't see in other states that a lot of primary care providers take care of neurology patients including epilepsy. And for the most part, they do a pretty good job. They learn by experience, and they tend to have at least some access to a neurologist, even if they're doing the primary management by phone calls and other measures as well, or periodic clinics, and in between clinic visits, the primary care providers often manage the patients. Alaska is also different in other states in that we probably have a significantly higher percentage of patients with epilepsy. Although I've never really seen a good epidemiological study, meaning going through and charting this out. But there's good reasons for that disparity, which we'll talk about in a little bit. One of the more reasons that we see localization related to epilepsy, which is basically epilepsy from one area of the brain, like from damage, is a common consequence here in Alaska, is because of Alaska lifestyle. And people get outdoors in often precarious situations on snow machines, on ATVs, four-wheelers, and unfortunately don't use helmets very often. And we see that a lot. I mean, in some of these villages, there's no road whatsoever. I mean, there may be some dirt road across town, but outside of that, the airstrip, local airstrip, there's nothing. And the primary means of transportation is by, walking, snow machines, four-wheelers, or the local airplanes. And I'll often ask, well, how long does it take you from one of these villages on the river? How long does it take you to get to Bethel? And they'll say, 12 minutes by air. 45 minutes by ATV, or maybe 10 minutes by snow machine. Because in the winter, they just go straight across the rivers and everything. So it may actually be faster travel in the winter than that rivals air travel in some cases. So we have different means of transportation here in Alaska, obviously, than the rest of the country. And some of those, unfortunately, end up with accidents and head injuries, particularly when we don't wear headgear as much. Other factors, there's quite a bit of meningitis, particularly in the young. And in the wintertime, obviously, we spend a lot of time indoors. There's more person-to-person contact, and there's more transmissible diseases as a result. Some of that's bacterial. Bacterial meningitis is very severe, like meningococcus, pneumococcus. Even in the age of antibiotics that are readily available, even in the clinic, it's hard sometimes to tell that a very young child has meningitis. They don't have the classic stiff neck and fever and complaints. They may not be able to talk. The kid may be whiny and limp, and may not be able to diagnose a young patient having meningitis until it's pretty far advanced, especially when you're living in the bush. There's just a few hundred people. There's no real skilled medical providers available to look your child over and get an opinion. Gunshot injuries, for various reasons. We have an active subsistence lifestyle here in the bush in Alaska, and bullets sometimes don't go where you expect them or want them to. So gunshot injuries, including the nervous system, is another reason that we see a lot of injuries. Alcohol. And sometimes other illicit drugs can lead to some consequences like head injuries or epilepsy itself, alcohol withdrawal seizures. You can have seizures from alcohol, either too much or too little. If you're used to having alcohol in your system on a regular basis and you suddenly take it away from somebody, they withdraw. They get convulsions, true epileptic seizures. They can occasionally go into status epilepticus, which is a serious condition. About 7 to 48 hours after you stop drinking, when you're used to having it in your system, you can have an alcohol withdrawal seizure. And then to make matters worse, 2, 3, 4, 5 days down the road, you may get another syndrome of alcohol withdrawal, what they call delirium tremens, which can be real serious or fatal. People die in that. That's where they get the hallucinations, sweating, and tachycardia, where your heart goes out of control, and the patients can get very ill and sometimes have heart problems during that period of time. Delirium tremens, the DTs, is what you hear people talk about. The alcohol can also lead to seizures or make seizure control much more difficult by interfering with the medication. And then, of course, the crazy Alaskan lifestyle, which we all know and love. Now, some other special challenges in bush Alaska is the distance. I mean, this is one of the typical maps we've all seen. Just looking from the tip of Aleutians down the southeast, you're essentially looking at the entire United States to travel. And no other state obviously has that type of daunting task of providing medical care. When you consider that almost all the neurologists are here in Anchorage, and Fairbanks, there's a few, and in Matsu Valley, of course, we've got Dr. Buckland and Sponsler, and then there's one neurologist in Juneau, and she's working part-time. That's it. Well, I guess in Kenai there's a neurologist as well, but you're looking at a very small population of neurologists in a very clustered area around the metropolitan areas. So these patients with neurological conditions like epilepsy have very long trips, and it's very expensive. Airfare, they have to go from their village to a hub, like Bethel or Barrow or Juneau or wherever, and then from the hub into Anchorage. And because they have epilepsy, at least these particular patients we're talking about, they have to go with somebody to help them in case they have a seizure on the airplane. That happens more often than you might imagine. And in case they have a seizure on the airplane, help manage them, to help provide information to the treating physician. They have escorts. Suddenly the cost is doubled, which is already very high for travel. And then you have lodging, you have meals, and so the cost often of coming to see the physician, the treating physician for epilepsy, is much, much higher than the cost of actually the medical care itself, or even when you combine the treatment of the pharmaceuticals. It's very expensive for patients to come to see us. So we try to keep that in mind and not have trivial follow-ups, because a lot of the costs in these patients may come out of their pocket. You're talking about people living a subsistence lifestyle. how are they accumulating money? I mean, there's very little opportunity. So you may give a great burden, a financial burden to these patients if you end up doing things that they really don't need. It's not necessary. So we try to keep that in mind and try to limit the burden on them economically as well as medically. Our ambulances in Alaska usually have wings. Sometimes they have paws. And to medevac somebody from even the hubs like Barrow or whatever into Anchorage requires a dedicated jet with medical facilities, the pilots, cost, and then at least one, if not two, medical providers that go along with them. You're looking at tens of thousands of dollars easily, often $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 just to fly a person into Anchorage for the treatment. If they have status epilepticus, for instance, and then they're intubated, they got the long hospital stay. You're looking at costs that are incurred here at this state that really few other states have. I mean, there's some long distances in the western areas, but nothing really rivals Alaska, either in the distances, the cost, or the frequency of the necessary travel. Now, we have developed a system here at A&MC, the Alaska Native model, which has evolved pretty efficiently. Basically, we have the main flagship hospital, this one, right where we're standing. But we have a lot of regional clinics as well, which are very well staffed. They're in Barrow. It's in Neurology when we do field clinics. We go to Barrow, Costa-Mesa, Dillingham, Bethel, Fairbanks, Kodiak, Ketchikan, Juneau. We go to Metlakatla. We go to Quogue as well. We go to all these different clinics. And by going to these clinics, we come to the patients. And so, like if we see a patient in Bethel by myself or other practitioners, they don't have to travel all the way here to see us and incur that expense. We can see, I don't know, 20, 30 patients sometimes in a day. So that saves a lot of money when we go to where the problem is. However, bear in mind that Bush, they still have to travel for the small communities into Bethel, which is still very expensive. So you still got the cost. At least we've reduced the cost for a lot of these people out in the Bush villages. Now, these regional hospitals are staffed. They have specialty nurses that know what they're doing, that have done this a lot, that help us out. It's pretty effective. These clinics tend to have CAT scans available, which is nice, blood work readily available. It's staffed with emergency room physicians. A lot of them have OB/GYN, usually very well trained. They're independent. Some of the people in the Bush don't like these regional clinics, quite frankly, because of the turnover. It's hard to keep full-time staff that want to live in Bethel or Barrow and make it their home. There's a lot of turnover, and so there's not good continuity of care. But these clinics, and I've been in them a lot, they're very well staffed, and they're often beautiful. And it's kind of cool to go to these clinics from the provider standpoint, because we get to see how the patients live. You frequently go into their home. I know one time I went into Metlakatla and got there like the night before, didn't have anything to do, so the nurse came by and we went and made house calls. There were a couple of patients that were paralyzed. It was really hard for them to get in the clinic, so I went into their home and saw them and had the chart, and it was a good experience. You got to see how they lived, and you learned a lot about their situation by actually being in their home, by being in their own home. So it's a good opportunity for us, these regional clinics, as providers, in addition to making it much easier for the patients. It's a two-way street here. A&MC here, we have a full complement of medical services. And if we don't carry it, or if it's a little beyond what we can do, then we'll send it out. An example is epilepsy. Like one of the options of intractable epilepsy is epilepsy surgery. But we don't have the facility here to do that. So if we've exhausted our resources here, and the next step is something that we don't offer, we'll send them down to Seattle, like Swedish Hospital, Harborview, or wherever. Occasionally, Seattle is our most common referral center, but we'll oftentimes send them to other places as well if it's other medical problems. So we work hand in hand a lot of times with other facilities that are very happy to take our patients. Sometimes the paperwork is a pain. but it tends to work out pretty well. We're getting more and more resources. Dr. Buckland, who spoke earlier, is now able to provide prolonged video EEG monitoring, which is really, in the past, we would sometimes send people down for prolonged monitoring. That was the only thing that was necessary. It wasn't like invasive. It's a shame that we couldn't do it here because it's expensive. It's hard for the patients to stay away from their families, and it was just difficult. Now we can get that done here by sending them down to the valley. And now Providence has just opened up isn't that right, Robert? Providence just opened up a prolonged monitoring. Yeah, I think in the last week or two, Providence now has the capability, so it makes it much easier for patients. We can do at least some of the groundwork here in Alaska, and then the more specialty stuff can still be done in Seattle. It's getting better and better. Now, the regional hospitals I mentioned are able to do a lot of the groundwork for us. We can get blood work and pretty good turnaround on the regional hospitals. Like if I need a Dolant level, phenytoin level, I can usually get it pretty quickly. If I need something else that's a little more unusual, like a trileptal and oxcarbazepine, it still has to go out by, I guess, by mail down to Seattle or California or someplace. We still have a long turnaround. But the basic stuff, even in neurology, is pretty well taken care of in these regional clinics. They know how to stabilize the patients. If somebody, let's say, has seizures and they lost their airway and have trouble breathing, they can take care of it in these regional clinics. They're pretty good at that stuff. And a lot of these clinics, what will happen is they'll call us up, on the phone. We get phone calls all the time, every day. Hey, I saw one of your patients, he had a breakthrough seizure. He's on this, that, and the other. He's sure that he took the medication. What do you suggest? Well, I would do this, order this, do this, have them come back in for follow-up at such and such. So a lot of these well-trained people, even though they're in primary care, will contact us, give us a good history. We'll get information they already have, add to it, and then get a follow-up. We really save them a lot of time coming down and get them in for a follow-up in a timely fashion. So we utilize their expertise even remotely. We don't necessarily have to be on site. They call us a lot. Every day we get calls from outside. Some of these clinics are they're beautiful. The one in Nome is brand new. Have you guys anybody here ever seen the one in Nome? Beautiful artwork, murals on the wall. It's huge. Dillingham, Kotzebue, over here in Piling, so in the permafrost. This is our flagship here. Barrow, Samuel Simmons Medical Center just opened up the new facility. It's very nice. Bethel's huge. They probably need a new facility. Mount Edgecombe, the old tuberculosis hospital in Sitka, is now Mount Edgecombe Hospital. Got the best view if you ever get a chance to go up on the roof. I strongly recommend it and get a look at the bay and everything. It's a really nice facility. Now, the village health clinics are basically the ones ringing around the regional health clinics, and they're kind of small. The one in Metlakatla is probably the most beautiful clinic I've ever seen. It's new. It's got all these facilities inside and beautiful artwork and picturesque surroundings by Yellow Mountain and Purple Mountain. Now, this is a very unusual picture for Metlakatla because you see blue skies. Okay. In Metlakatla, they talk about Purple Mountain being the weather mountain. It reliably predicts the weather because if you can't see the mountain, it's raining. If you can see the mountain, it's getting ready to rain. So that's why they call it the weather mountain. Point Hope, way up there around Barrow area, clinic as well. And the clinics, some of the bigger clinics are staffed occasionally by physicians. Like in Metlakatla, they'll have 2 or 3 physicians. They staff a full ER. A lot of times there are physicians that come through like once a week or whatever, and the PAs or nurse practitioners may staff it, and they really do a good job. These are very independent. We've got probably PAs and NPs out in the bush that are probably better than most areas in the country, just if nothing else, their experience in the School of Hard Knocks. They do a pretty good job with our neurology patients. And a lot of times the village health aides may end up doing the lion's share of the work. And they do a pretty good job too, and they're not afraid to call the regional clinics if it's something beyond what they can do. So it's a system that's evolved over a long period of time, and it works pretty well. Not perfect. We can always do better, always trying to strive to improve further. But it's a pretty good system. It's unique in the United States, if not the world. Now, especially clinics, basically that's where I mentioned where we come to the patient. And it's a two-way street. We get a lot of, we get to meet the providers that we talk to on the phone all the time, which is really nice. We get to see where people live. And I think it means something to the patient too. When they come over here and from Barrow, and they don't know who the heck you are, they've never seen you, you're just Dr. Hines or whatever, and they say, hey, have they, and you know that Pepe's north of the border burned down on Barrow, and you know, and also the top of the world hotel burned down. So, well, you know, you can talk to them. So what's the deal? Are they going to rebuild Pepe's? Oh, they're rebuilding the top of the world Pepe's, and it means something to them when you know what's going on locally, or when you ask about the Whalers football field, which is a really good football field in Barrow. Never got a chance to see it. It's like AstroTurf. Green field out in the middle of nowhere. You see these radar stations where they're looking for missiles and everything in the background. It's really neat to see that in Barrow. And so we get to go there and see what part of the community is like. And and they get the providers will come and ask you questions firsthand in between patients, and sometimes we'll pop into the emergency room, somebody's there. There'll be somebody as an inpatient that has a neurological issue in addition to whatever they have the patient admitted for, and we may just kind of informally do a consult with an inpatient. It works out really well. It's not just neurology. Surgery goes there a lot, ENT, ophthalmology, dental, orthopedics, blah, 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 blah. And a lot of these people go, we tend to go to most of the field clinics at least twice a year, but in the southeast, we probably go 3 times a year as a rule of thumb. Kodiak tends to have its own cadre of specialists and Fairbanks as well. In neurology, we don't go to those clinics because they already have those specialties. Like some of the Providence physicians, many ones will go to the Kodiak, and Fairbanks already has neurologists, so there's little reason for us here to go up there. A little break here. This is I wanted to point something out. Most of what we do here is, of course, Western medicine, but there's some traditional medicine as well that's involved, not only in AMC, but elsewhere. We talk about the CBDs, you know, and cannabis, which is an old medical treatment. It's ancient. It goes back to ancient China, for that matter. But Western medicine doesn't always have the answer. This is a painting called The Extraction of the Stone of Madness. And basically, this guy is like doing a surgery, opening up the scalp and removing a stone. It was believed in the Middle Ages that people were insane or confused or had seizures from, quote, rocks in their heads, unquote. That's where we get that saying, oh, he must have a rocks in his head, meaning he's crazy. It comes from this practice. This was a sham operation. They would palm a stone, take their payment, and leave town. This painting is by Hieronymus Stock. It's an allegory. The guy has an inverted funnel in his head, which is the forerunner of the dentist cap, because he's a charlatan. The funnels things, right? So he can't avail himself of God's knowledge because he's a crook. And the book, back then before Gutenberg's printing press, where all religious works, his accomplice here has a book on her head which she can't read. Same thing, because they're fighting. In the background is a gallows suggesting what's in store for them. This is kind of a moral or political lesson for the day, talking about the charlatans going around doing these sham surgeries on the brain. Meanwhile, in Mesoamerica, the ancient Incans at the same time were doing brain surgeries, and it was working. They knew these people with these, and basically what they were operating on was subdural epidural hematomas, growths, you know, which are catastrophic life. And these people lived often for decades following. They had good operative results. Presumably, they used cocoa leaves or extracts for anesthesia, and they knew the principles of cerebral localization. They knew to operate the same side of the blown pupil or the opposite side of the hemiplegia if there was a head injury. And nobody knew that in medicine, Western medicine, until late in the 19th century. And yet, centuries earlier, the ancient Incas were doing modern medicine with stone tools and good results. It's just amazing to me. Now, moving ahead to the mass media. you know, even in the most remote Alaskan village, there's internet access. There's probably few villages where only a few people live or whatever that may not have anything, but GCI and some of the other providers have done a really good job about bringing access. Now, granted, the access isn't very fast. Like, it's the lowest internet you could speed available when you go to places, even like Kotzebue, which is a pretty good sized place. It's a very slow internet in a lot of cases, and it's but we can still get internet access and be wired in, even remote Alaskan villages. It's going to get better. It's already getting better than laying new cable, and it'll probably make a big difference in our medical management when that happens, because we use a lot of higher technology to communicate with the bush. We have teleradiography. Teleradiography was, to some degree, was invented here in Alaska Native Medical Center. In fact, I believe that the medical center at ANTHC owns patents somehow, you know, related to telemedicine. This is one of the first places that this was done in the United States. And we do that in neurology. They do a lot of telemedicine in places like dermatology, you know, where they can actually look and diagnose. It's very accurate. They're very good at this, where they can actually look and make a diagnosis and put out a treatment plan, and some other disciplines as well. It's a way of reducing costs and giving instantaneous service very accurately and safely. The telemedicine, like I said, this is one of the places where it started. But you know, you really have to have high-speed internet in order to do this. But not all places have high-speed internet, but most places have the ability to at least, you know, communicate by cell phone. So even the remote villages, this is actually Anahuac Pass. Have anybody ever been to Anahuac Pass? You have. Isn't that a beautiful little village? It's like nestled in the mountains, and the river goes through. It's a nice community. The roads are all laid out. A river goes through it. Isn't that the name of a book and movie? River goes through it. But it's a beautiful little place. That's where I flew into this summer. And we hiked out towards Ernie Pass, and it was a really cool trip. But they had internet. I could pick it up. Even my AT&T, I could still pick up over here in Anahuac Pass. Surprised me because it's not well established through Alaska. And even when we're in remote areas, we can still communicate by smartphones, which makes a big difference. So what happens a lot of times is people will be in villages and there's an event that occurs with the patient. And they may jerk, may twitch, may fall to the ground. It's unclear as to what this is. Is this a seizure? Is this a movement or is it tremor? Did the patient drop their blood pressure and lose consciousness? Even though these people may live out in small villages, they still have some technology, and a lot of these people are very savvy technologically. A lot of them will video these events and send them to us. They'll either come by the clinic and say, this is what happened, or even send a secure email to us as well. And that's really helpful. And oftentimes when I see a patient, and the family member or the patient himself is describing events, say, look, if this happens again, make sure, you know, number one, make sure they're safe, and number two, try to video this. And get as much as you can and send it to me. Because a lot of times I can really tell by looking. I remember one patient that the description was real iffy for seizures, and the patient didn't think it was a seizure, and neither did her spouse. And, well, if you video it, send it to me. Once I saw it was real clear it was epileptic. There was no question whatsoever. Because I could see things that meant a lot to me that they really wouldn't know to look for and explain. So it was really helpful to get this. So the smartphones can be a real valuable tool. And we sent images, specialists out of our town. A lot of times, like I'm out of town, and I've been in meetings and shoot, Robert, you've done this. I've been to meetings places, and there was an EEG that was being run, and there was nobody right there to read it. There's a key question during the EEG that we didn't know what it was. They can take a picture of it, and these high-resolution things, we can blow it up and look at it and run it back and forth. And you can get really good and accurate information, provide immediate feedback, even if you're far out of town and away from where the study's being done. Same thing with CAT scans and MRI scans. Good resolution. So these smartphones can be used to provide instantaneous feedback, so that they don't have to wait for somebody to actually come in and physically look at the study, face to face, which isn't optimal. The downside of that is you really have to have some kind of good conduction speed. It's hard to send high resolution things if you've got a real slow connection speed. You can't bill for that, which we really don't care about. But HIPAA law, privacy laws are kind of questionable. And smartphones are real secure, and we now have at A&MC we use Tiger Text, which is a HIPAA compliant, real secure system that there's no question about it. We can send images and things like that now through Tiger Text, so there's ways around that. There's an example. This is like one took their smartphone. You can, somebody with the shunt, maybe with a head injury, say, oh my God, did the shunt stop working? Is it hydrocephalus? No. The ventricular size is normal. There's no hydrocephalus. Here's somebody that was during an EEG that had an event. What happened? Well, you can see over here that there's a seizure that occurred from the left temporal area. So even though you're not on site, you can still look at some key pieces of information and help with immediate management of the patient. Now, moving ahead to medications, which is a lot of what we do, obviously, and neurologists that work with epilepsy, which almost all neurologists would work with epilepsy. Most of what we have to offer is anticonvulsants. Neurologist, diagnostic, of course, but manage in many ways anticonvulsants. But we have more options now and getting more and more through time. Sometimes we even manage psychiatric conditions because there's relatively few psychiatrists around, and neurologists get some cross-training. Sometimes we have some medical knowledge and help with some other issues as well outside of what traditional neurology is. But most of what we do is still neurology. We do a lot of epilepsy. We don't have as many ancillary personnel to help us out in neurology here in Alaska as most other neurologists would have. Like there's a discipline called physical medicine rehab, and they get a lot of training that kind of cross covers with neurology, a lot of neuromuscular disease. They see a lot of post-stroke patients. We actually got our first physical medicine rehab doctor ever in South Central. But she's just doing outpatient stuff. But that was a big deal for us. And there's very few in Anchorage that work outside of pain management, physical medicine rehab, that just do the physical medicine rehab. There's even fewer outside. So we end up, neurologists, seeing a lot of things like traumatic brain injuries, et cetera, that usually other disciplines would end up seeing because we're really all there is. Physical therapy is hard to get. Speech therapy, there's only a few around. And neuropsychologists, there's only a few around. So we end up doing a lot of what other neurologists have other disciplines do here. We have a broader practice in neurology in the bush. Another little break, because neurology is a very dry subject. This is from the Alaska, this is from the museum here in Alaska. I took this picture with my iPhone. And when I first came here, I had heard this story, and one of my first patients was this elder who was in his early 80s from Barrow. And I showed him this picture I'd taken, and I said, hey, I heard this story that these masks showing facial distortions were originally a moral lesson. These are used to teach kids. Is that true? And he told me the story, and he said, yeah. He said, and it was like 80, it was probably 75 years ago, like the turn of the century. He said, when I was a kid, they brought all the other kids our age around a campfire, and they talked to us about the importance of community, how we all had been together. You don't make fun of people if they've got an injury or maybe they have a facial distortion or whatever, because especially up there's a lot of mastoiditis, no antibiotics, infections with the mastoid bone, erode in the facial nerve, and you get a permanent paralysis. And you still see a lot of people with hearing loss and sometimes facial weakness as a result. And so there would be some facial asymmetry where the face would be lax on one whole side, and so they would look different. And they talked to us and said you didn't stare at them or single them out or make them feel bad. And then he told me that what happened afterwards was somebody would come out with these masks and dance around comically and try to get them to laugh. If they laughed, they were whipped. So that's kind of that's at least one version of the story of these masks. I thought it was kind of cool. All right, now anticonvulsants. Most of what we do in neurology is anticonvulsants, although I mentioned we have other options now. I prescribe differently sometimes if the patient's in Bush, Alaska, than if they live in Anchorage. And there's good reasons for that. Ideally, you want little or no blood work because it's hard to get blood work out in some of these communities. They may have limited airfare to get it. Blood may clot. There's a turnaround time for blood work. It may not be practical. Some of the village aides are new and don't have a lot of experience in drawing blood, so you're asking a lot from the patient. So you want to limit blood work if you can to what you really need. You want for little or no interactions because it's hard to deal with less medical care if there's interactions. What's an interaction? What isn't? Makes it more tough. Infrequent dosing, once or twice a day. These people are out hunting caribou. Okay, are you going to give them a medicine they have to take 4 times a day? It ain't happening. They're not going to take it, so you don't want to do that. Once a day is preferable. Twice a day if necessary. I hate to prescribe 3 times a day or more out in the bush. You want side effects that are few and tolerable. If you live in town and you're a little dizzy or whatever, you might be able to you can get your neighbor to drive you someplace, and you've got other resources. But when you're out in Point Hope and you're going out to hunt seals out on the ice, you don't want people dizzy and falling in the water and freezing to death. I mean, that stuff can happen. You want to limit potential adverse effects as much as possible. Not that we always don't try to do that, but it's more important there. And sometimes we look at beneficial side effects, meaning every medicine has a potential side effect, but sometimes they can be helpful. Like if I see a patient with seizures, and I've got a number of choices to treat with anticonvulsants, and they also have diabetes and high blood pressure. Well, the diabetes and high blood pressure can kill them and cripple them just as surely as seizures can. So I may pick a medication with the side effect of weight loss. Because if they lose weight, their diabetes, high blood pressure is going to be under better control, help them out medically too. So I may pick zonisamide or pyramate, whereas another patient without those issues going on, I may have picked, something else like Keppra. So I kind of individualize treatment, and sometimes I'm looking for beneficial side effects. And the idea of medication is obviously going to be different from patient to patient. It's an individual thing. One size doesn't fit all. There we go. And here's an example of why things are different out here. This is a case. It's actually a Parkinson's patient, but this 64-year-old lady that end-stage Parkinson's disease. We tried everything, and it wasn't working. It worked up to this point. She was having a lot of trouble, so next step is look at surgery. Run a deep brain stimulator. You run a wire deep into you can run into the subthalamic nucleus, I think is where hers went. And you run the wires into a little pacemaker that goes in the chest wall. Gives it a little current. You can turn off at night to save the battery. It does a fine job of controlling tremors and stiffness on one side of the body. Can help you to limit the medications, which in Parkinson's disease can eventually give you a lot of side effects. So we sent her for evaluation, and she was continuing her medicines, carbidopa, levodopa, selegiline, and Mirapex. And she goes to Seattle, and she's a great surgical candidate. They've got her scheduled for surgery on Tuesday. Well, on Monday night, she's met in with all these people, white lab coats, and they're glaring at her. They say surgery's off until she goes through drug rehab because they toxicology screened her first and she was positive for amphetamines. So anyways, I come to field clinic and I start talking to her. And while I'm talking, I'm like looking for the surgical side, looking for the holes, where they drilled in little burr holes. I said, didn't you have the surgery? And she broke down and cried. She told me the story. She said, once I took hydrocodone when I broke my ankle. That's the only time I've ever seen a drug my whole life. So I get hold of the toxicology screen. She was positive for amphetamines. You know why? Because she was on selegiline. Selegiline gets broken down into your body, and one of its metabolites is dextroamphetamine. And nobody at this academic institution realizes this, because Selegiline is an old medicine. It works very well. It's dirt cheap. And everybody in this institution of the Ivory Tower would keep their patients on the new and improved Reseduline, which didn't have the metabolite. So they didn't even realize that you're going to get a false positive drug reading on this lady that was doing nothing other than take the medications as prescribed. And so called them up, explained this, and she got her surgery. They were extremely nice to her, by the way. Yeah, so it turned out okay, but it's different. We have different medicines sometimes on the formulary. A lot of these, like that was down in the southeast, they have a restricted formulary. They can't afford the really expensive medication. So you sometimes have to be aware of that when you prescribe. I don't prescribe a lot of phenytoin and carbamazepine out in the bush. I don't like that because there's a lot of bone disease and brittle bones and osteoporosis. Those are enzyme-inducing anticonvulsants. I mean, they work really well, and they're dirt cheap, and at least phenytoin you can dose once daily. They got the roll, but it makes me nervous because it can eventually make your bones brittle. If I prescribe those, I try to get them to take vitamin D and calcium as well. But they require blood tests, and the side effects include imbalance. So not my favorite medicines for the bush, although we frequently use it for other reasons. Valproic acid is a great medicine. I mean, we use it a lot. It's good for headaches. It's good for mood swings too. But you do have to do a lot of blood tests. It can aggravate your liver. Makes me a little uncomfortable. Side effects, weight gain, including weight gain. Don't use a lot of that. Lamotrigine is another great medicine. You have to dose at least twice daily in a lot of cases. And it interacts with a lot of different things, and it takes a long time to go up. If you give it to somebody out in the bush you can't monitor, you may take weeks to get up to the proper level, and it's hard for you to monitor that when they're in the bush. So these are great medicines. We use a lot in Anchorage, but less out in the bush. We use a lot in the bush Keppra. It doesn't require blood tests. It doesn't interact with anything. It doesn't hurt your liver. That's important, liver. Out in the bush, like in all through Alaska, we're probably the biggest state for like hepatitis C, hepatitis B, a lot of liver issues, a lot of hereditary liver issues. So we're very cognizant about liver issues here. So this has no liver metabolism, no drug interactions. You can dose it once daily with a brand name, which nobody here carries, but twice daily usually. And also, if you give it to a young woman with childbearing potential, it doesn't interact with birth control pills. And there's really no more risk of fetal birth malformations in this medicine than placebo. So we use a heck of a lot of Keppra. I use a lot of zanisamide for my patients, and it's once-a-day dosing, which is really nice. And it's got a 60-hour half-life, meaning it takes 60 hours for that medicine to drop down to 1/2 of the dosing. And that's a huge benefit because in some of my patients, they live far out in the bush, and they have little access to medication sometimes. Like people that live out in St. George, in the Privilege, they may go 3 weeks between mail service in the winter during the storms. And so sometimes they'll go without the medication. And in an emergency, you can actually dose zanisamide every other day and stretch it out. The dose will be lower, but there's still a decent dose. And so I've had to do that before in patients. We usually call them and get them to stretch it out that way if they don't have any more available. So, and one of the side effects is weight loss, which kind of makes it popular. So we use a lot of zanisamide. Non-pharmacological measures. We're doing this more and more. Vagus nerve stimulator. We've got quite a few patients with vagus nerve stimulators. It runs up to the vagus nerve here in the neck. It gives you a constant stimulation, like every minute or so. It'll stimulate it. The patient rarely feels. Pacemaker type of device here in the chest wall. They'd have to replace this every few to several years, which is a minor surgery. And this constant stimulation is called neuromodulation. It eventually, over time, makes seizures less frequent, less severe. It does require some travel to have this checked out, which we're happy to do, but again, it's extra travel for patients. It's an expense. A new device we have now is NeuroPace, which is basically, this is really cool. It's like the same type of thing, but it's implanted in the skull. You take the skull out, you hollow out the skull, and you put this battery with wires running from it. It's inside the skull. So when all is said and done, you can't tell. You can't see the patient. They're completely normal looking because the wires go inside the brain, and they can run like 4 different wires, like maybe in the mesial temporal area, which is where a lot of seizures come from, or maybe frontal area, but depending on where you want. And this does a couple things. It does continuous monitoring. It tells you if you're having seizures or not, or where spikes are. So you get lots of information as to where the epileptic source is. And also, if the seizure is starting, it'll sense it, and it'll shock. The patient doesn't feel it, microvolts. They'll be talking, whatever, and a seizure is getting ready to occur, and it'll sense the seizure, and it will abort it ahead of time. And then there's a telephonic device that the patients can use to download the information to, and you can see, well, you know, you had 2 seizures, but it aborted 14. And they were all coming from the right tube. Get all this information that we didn't have available before. It's like continuous monitoring, day in, day out, that the patient has. And I think with high-speed internet, we'll be able to save them trips in and out. We'll be able to download the information directly. So this is brand new stuff, and they're getting more. They're doing more and more. This vagus nerve stimulator, now the most recent thing, it'll pick up the people that have the seizures at the fast heart rate. It'll pick it up and shock the vagus nerve stimulator when it's getting ready to start. It'll anticipate a seizure on the basis of heart rate. Even if you're asleep and getting ready to have a seizure, it'll give an extra shock to abort it. So these devices are becoming better and better with time. So it's kind of an exciting thing, looking at reducing seizures and some of the complications that we hear. Phineas Gage, this is an interesting story that taught us a lot about the brain. This guy was a Burlington and Vermont foreman. And this is where it happened in 1848. He was tapping carefully nitroglycerin to blow this pass open, and exploded, and it shot a rod through his skull, right through his left eye. This is the rod. He was, you know, the rod was like 100 yards away. They found it, and he was like, skull was everywhere, brain matter coming out of his head. They knew he was going to die. Put him in bed. They had no treatment back then. After 3 days or so, he got tired of people wringing their hands over him. He got up and walked out. But after that, he recovered, but his personality changed. Frontal lobe damage. So this is how we learned about the frontal lobe having to do with brain. He had seizures too. It had to do with seizures, brain injury. His skull is in Harvard Medical Museum because his physician, Harlow, dug up his body in California. Grave robber took his skull and brought it back to the Harvard Museum. Compliance issues, it's very important. Nothing we're going to do is going to work in terms of medicines if you don't take the medication. So we do education, and especially with family and friends, make sure people keep an eye out. But it's a big burden for some of these people. They don't have a lot of resources in some of these villages. Family is really important. Education. Alcohol, drugs, educate that to make sure that that's not interfering with the seizure control. Cannabis, we talked about cannabis. I've had some patients believe that cannabis itself helps control the seizures and stop the medicines. Doesn't tend to work out very well. And one thing they didn't talk about was the recreational cannabis in young people can cause brain impairment, and it may be permanent. That's what they didn't talk about the last one. I don't know. The question I wanted to ask them was the CBDs. Probably that's safe in terms of young people. But once you're over 30, your brain's already formed. It doesn't matter. You're not going to get damage to your brain from cannabis at that age. But younger people have to be very careful in recommending that because they will get lower IQs. It's proven in studies. But I think probably the CBDs, at least I hope, I wanted to find out if the CBDs are safer. But I'm talking about like the recreational stuff, not the medical stuff. Very different. So no medicines are going to help unless you take it on a regular basis. You have to be really good about taking these medicines or they're not going to work. You can't take it now and then. These are nice because sometimes people are forgetful. These little packets with the medications preloaded. You know, family can do that, or occasionally some of the, like Geneva Woods will do that here in town. Family members, especially younger family members, are very savvy. They can program their cell phones to go off twice a day to remind them to take the medication. And then the pill boxes I mentioned. You want to try to schedule follow-ups so that it doesn't coincide with the fish runs. When the reds and silvers are running, they have follow-up for their epilepsy, they're not going to show up because they got to feed their family. So we ask about this. We've learned to do this. Don't want to, first week of moose season, don't bother. Okay. You know, maybe in Anchorage you'll do that, but out in the bush, it's just not going to happen. Avoid stereotyping. These people may live in the village. Their bathroom may be a bucket. They may have to get their water out of the river, but that doesn't mean you're smarter than they are. And they're perfectly adapted to their own environment. They can wire up a snow machine. I could never do that, probably even if I took courses. So these are, you can't talk down to these people. You'll end up looking like a fool. They're perfectly adapted to their own environment. You have to kind of recognize what their environment is and work around it. You also have to remember the financial things. If people live out in the subsistence lifestyle, where are they going to get their money? I mean, they may fend for themselves and their whole family and take care of themselves, but the cash is low. They have to use cash to buy bullets to get fruit and vegetables. So you have to keep in mind, make sure you're not becoming a financial burden to them by ordering medicines they can't pay, that they have to pay for, that's not on the formulary, or unnecessary travel that may take them away from their family and job and subsistence. I got time for a few questions or comments. Anybody on the webcast? Can they hear me out there? One of my patients showed me, he was showing me pictures on his iPhone. He showed me these pictures just like this, beautiful. It looked like National Geographic. I couldn't believe the clarity. He was up around Point Hope and Barrow. And then he showed me this picture. It was kind of hazy, and I saw these white mounds, and they were polar bears. They were hibernating. He got off a snow machine. I crawled in this polar bear den. I took a picture of this mother and two cubs hibernating. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, he knew what he was doing. He had done this before, but he wanted to show me the pictures. Pretty amazing. Another guy was attacked by a wolverine. A lot of his toes were frostbite. He had wrecked his snow machine. Yeah, I think he was on Good Morning America or something. They talked about that. He was on national news. How does the funding go for the travel? I think the funding comes through the individual regional clinics. They pay for the travel and such, and they make all the arrangements. That was part of the contract they had with A&MC when it opened, that we would provide regional clinics and that type of thing. They also fund these patients to come up and see us. So I think that they're happy to send us down there because it saves them money. So that's not much of an issue. We just fly, Raven or Alaska Airline Air and go down, and we usually stay. They usually have apartments or whatever. You're often in the hospital as part of it, which is fine. Eat in the hospital cafeteria. But sometimes, I remember the first time I went down to Barrow, I went to a family and they had me try musktuck and seal meat. Very hospitable when you go in there. So it's a pretty cool experience. Another question? Okay, well, thanks for your attention and such, and I'll be around for a little bit if anybody has any other questions or comments. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll now take an hour lunch break, so we'll meet back in here at 1 o'clock Alaska time. That would be 2 o'clock Pacific time for our webcast viewers. So thanks for coming, and we'll see you in a bit.
about epilepsy, and it's about providing the community with supportive care and services. Now, we all have a passion for doing this, and we all care deeply about those with epilepsy, and really respect is key. Everybody has got different responsibilities, and we all have to be a part of this fight. And we recognize the need for improvement, not only in others, but in ourselves, because we can all push harder, we can all do a better job in creating this movement. And we believe that by working together within our communities, we can grow and serve more individuals and families. And when doing that, we bring people together, and we are able to uncover opportunities within the community that will in the long term help those who we serve. Okay. So background, a little bit more about me. Like I said, I started with the foundation in December, and up until that point, it was really about my family and myself and our friends in our community making a difference here in Clearwater, Florida, which is where I'm from. And as you can see in this picture, my girls are a little bit old there, but Livy and Haley. Livy is on the left in the left picture, and Haley is on the right there. Livy and Haley are 11 years old. They're twins. Livy was born with epilepsy, so she had her first seizure only a couple hours after she was born. And I actually was there that day when she had that seizure. We were actually in the NICU, which is a neonatal intensive care unit, and I was sitting by her bedside and watching her as she had to try and control her seizures. She's one of those kiddos who has really difficult to control epilepsy and can have more than 100 seizures per day. She's gone through multiple brain surgeries. Her second one was a hemispherectomy, which is the disconnecting of one side of the brain altogether. But even despite that, and despite the 4 medications she's on today, she still continues to have seizures. So for me, it's near and dear to my heart, to my family's heart, and to her sister Haley, who has been a complete advocate for Livy and does a lot within the community and for the Epilepsy Foundation to actually get more people involved. So for why epilepsy? Because something has to be done about it. I see my daughter every day when she wakes up, and she smiles every day, but she still has a really difficult time, and she's nonverbal, and she spends a lot of her day in a wheelchair, like you see in the other picture. But she has been through so much, but continues to be happy and continues to inspire people and give people hope. So she drives me on to help others. And really, our giving back to the community started with Livy's Hope, which was an organization my family and I created. And it was about giving back to those who gave back to us or helped us along our path. And we were able to be very successful in our local community to bring people together, to create awareness about epilepsy, to fundraise for research. And one of the biggest things that came from that was actually Lemonade for Livy, which is now a nationwide campaign at the foundation, and is in every single state across the country. And its purpose is to have people hold lemonade stands or parties with a lemon theme focus, and basically to raise money for the foundation's mission. And it's a really fun activity, which you can see in this picture. It was actually 2014 where we had a lemonade stand in every single state, which was fantastic. But in doing so, and in working with Livy's Hope and working with the community, I got very close to the foundation. And when the opportunity actually arose to lead the Community Action Network, I was so excited, and to be able to do this full time is absolutely amazing. I get to meet people across the country who want to get involved. I get to spread the mission of the foundation. I get to create awareness, and I get to hear so many stories in communities from coast to coast about the need in the communities and why we have to do better. And that really, why do I want to do it? Because we have to do it. There is no other option. My daughter needs it. Our families need it. The kids and the adults who struggle with epilepsy every single day need it. So it's something that is, for me, it's not a job. It's really a mission. And I'm lucky enough to be able to get up every day and actually to go out there and do it. And so I know I'm helping people, and it continues to drive me on every single day. So that's a little bit about me. And so with that being said, that brings me into the Community Action Network. And at the heart of this is a framework that we call ASAP, which stands for Awareness, Services, Advancement, and Participation. And really, each one has a sort of a definition, which I'll go through. But the basics of the Community Action Network is really to start these groups of volunteers in some of the bigger cities throughout the country. Not saying that we can't start them in small communities, but with big communities, there's more option to find people to actually volunteer. And there's 272 cities across the U.S. with 100,000 residents or more. And then as a second tier, there's 800 cities with 50,000 people or more. So now imagine if in a large percentage of those cities, we had groups of volunteers working together for a common purpose and to complete activities that either create awareness, that tell people about the services the foundation provides, or have fundraising activities, or contribute to some of the innovative technologies that are coming up, that are being created, or providing or participating in public policy advocacy. So it's a big project. It's a lot to get involved in, but there are people who do small things, people who do big things, and really at the heart it's about volunteering and getting involved, and in a coordinated way. So the first piece of that is awareness and telling people about education. And so this is really, it's talking to people in the community. It's creating awareness for professionals and the general public about what epilepsy is, what seizures are, and it's done through, in this case for the Community Action Network, through a series of activities. And so whenever I talk to people about the Community Action Network, I'm actually saying, this is a guideline. So we never say do everything. Typically we say pick two things, and really do it well. Get a group of people together and do it well. So these are the examples of awareness that are common in the community, and I can just run through these quickly. So on every second Monday of February, we have International Epilepsy Awareness Day, which was a campaign started by the International Bureau for Epilepsy, and it's really about letting the community know that this is a day that's celebrated worldwide that tries to create awareness around epilepsy. And when we ask people to actually do some of these things and participate, we typically say, okay, so pick an idea, pick a concept for this day. Say, are you gonna say, is my core theme, 1 in 26 people will develop epilepsy over the course of their lifetime, or is it that there's 150,000 new cases diagnosed in the U.S. every year? So it's really about picking a core message and then participating in one of these activities. So in March, every March 26th, there's National Epilepsy Awareness Day, where everyone dresses in purple, has purple parties or purple-themed activities, and it's about bringing people together and creating awareness. Then, of course, National Epilepsy Awareness Month is in November. There's many things that go on in November. There's a lot of social activity that happens over the web, and there's people who make purple cookies. I mean, there's a list of things that people do throughout November. And then, of course, actually coming up very soon is the Purple Pumpkin Project, which happens in October. And this is, again, an awareness activity where people get together and they paint their pumpkins purple. They display them out in front of their house. And they were started by a gentleman actually in Connecticut whose son has epilepsy, and he basically wanted a way for people to ask him about epilepsy. So he painted his pumpkin purple, and he basically says, now ask me why my pumpkin's painted purple. Kind of a tongue twister there, too, which is pretty fun. But this actually is great for kids, it's great for adults, it's great for schools, and some people take it to a whole new level and they actually have a fall festival. And so it's a great group activity to bring people together and actually do something fun. And along with that, there's national awareness campaigns, and actually there was one that just came out from the foundation not too long ago, which is Aim for Zero, which is really about awareness for those with epilepsy to get them to have fewer seizures and the things that to follow that will help people to have fewer seizures. So It's making people aware of those campaigns. And then we have Sac Seizures, which actually is a really cool activity that started in Indiana with the family. And the boy right now, his name is Drake, and he's actually 18. He was coming home from one of the national walks 2 years ago, and he said, Mom, what can we do to give back? What can we do to help the community? And he's a football player, so he wrote down on a napkin, how about we sack seizures? And so what they did is they took that term, and they have a football game, which is his high school when they play another high school, and both teams wear purple socks. They announce epilepsy sacks during halftime and throughout the game, and there's different activities, awareness activities that go on during the game. So that's actually one that the network is trying to make bigger and better, because it can be done at the high school level, it can be done at the middle school level, and obviously in the future it can be done at the college level, and who knows from there. But it's an activity which brings together lots of people at one time, so they can all learn about epilepsy. And then going on from there, part of the awareness is actually making people aware of the educational opportunities that the foundation provides, which the foundation has excellent programs. Lots of or most of the staff at local foundations can provide the training within the community to actually execute these programs. There's education about suit up. There's first responders training, and it's really the job or the volunteers. They actually don't do the training typically. They actually find the schools. They find the first responders to actually give the presentations to. And if you think about that, it's hard for the foundation to get into schools in many cases. So with volunteers and with parents, especially who have children with epilepsy, they're the ones who can be in the schools and can find either the administration who wants or who will allow the foundation to go and actually present the educational piece. So it's the best way for us to get in there and to actually do that kind of training. So that's awareness and education. And then the next part of our ASP model is about the service piece. And this, again, is not for volunteers to actually provide the service, but it's to let people know in the community that these services actually do exist. Many times, people don't even know the foundation is there in the community. So with the help of volunteers, they can actually talk to people, either if it's at an activity or it could even be a neighbor, just saying the foundation is here and these are the services that they can provide. And I've got some listed here that are fairly common throughout the country. There's actually an information and referral service, and actually for that one, there's actually a 24/7 line that can be called any time of the day. There's the Wellness Institute, which includes Studio E and Healthy Eating, and Studio E, of course, is the art therapy project, which is very common across the country, and is an opportunity for those with epilepsy to use art as a therapy. And then Healthy Eating, which with a healthy diet, that's a good way to reduce seizure activity, and also the ketogenic diet is in there too, which obviously is a diet, a special diet for those with epilepsy that has helped people with their seizures as well. And then it's letting people know about camps, and the camp system throughout the country is amazing. If anyone has seen camps that are dedicated to for a specific time to kids and families with epilepsy, it's amazing. And there's camps throughout the country that allow kids to go for either a week. Sometimes it's families for a weekend. Many of the camps have medical facilities that are very in-depth, so they can handle really kids who have really severe epilepsy. And it's an amazing way for families to meet each other, and it really gives kids an opportunity to, of course, spend time together where they have something in common, and they're not afraid to talk about epilepsy and how their experiences are. And then the other thing we ask people to talk about is the support services, including support groups, which is a big one at all different levels, and many of the foundations across the country have support systems like this, support groups for kids, for teenagers, for adults, and there's many other services that the foundation provides too. We always say go to the local foundation website and see what services are available and talk about it. Tell people what the services are that the foundation provides in the local area. Okay, so the next piece of that is advancement, and this is advancement through fundraising, because all of this happens with the support of the national group that pushes out the mission, creates programs. The volunteers fundraise for the local foundations, and there's some common things across the country that are done, and common themes. And with these four that I've got listed here, there's actually already a framework in place for many of these. So it's easy for people to participate. No one's creating the wheel. And just, for example, walks. Almost every foundation across the country has a walk or a run. And participating with a team in those is a great way to come together as a group and to volunteer, even to help set up at the walk. If a team comes together and helps set up and then walks and raises money for the foundation, that's an amazing thing to do. And I believe there is a group in the Northwest that they have a walk. They put on a walk every year, and that's the one thing they do. And that's an amazing example of how they can give back to the community. Then Athletes versus Epilepsy is actually a national program as well. And this is all about having athletes either participate in marathons that are selected across the country, and then people also have the opportunity to pick actually an event that they want to participate in, and they're able to fundraise through that activity, or to do it yourself. It's creating a kickball game, or it's having a baseball game, or some type of athletic activity that where people can actually either pay to enter or the fundraising involved. But it's about having an organized sport and people coming together. And then, of course, we have Lemonade for Livy, which happens every July. End of July is the big weekend for that. And it's about having a lemonade stand or a party, like I had spoken about before. And what's really cool about this one is that we were able to secure a big sponsor this year in Shopko Stores, which has stores in the Midwest and the West Coast out there. And they collected donations at the register, which was amazing. They raised in total $77,000, which is a large amount of that's going right back into local communities. And it's a great campaign for kids. Kids come together and they sell lemonade together or have a party. Believe it or not, it's great for adults. Even adults have their parties. And it's not even necessarily having lemonade, but for instance, there was a group that had a poker tournament. It was a poker tournament geared towards raising money for the campaign. So there's lots of opportunity to participate in this one. And what's good about that, again, is there's lots of collateral that's already been produced. So it's not reinventing the wheel. It's something that everyone can get behind. And this coming year, in July, a lot more of it's going to be going back to local communities as well. So it's something that's easy to do, which is, we always say that too, easy to do. And it's in every state around the country, and it's getting more popular every year. And then the next one after that is Talk About It at Dinner. And this is a little less known one. Actually, it was started by Phil Gattone, who is the CEO of the Epilepsy Foundation National. And he started in Chicago, where he basically said to his neighbors and some friends, come on over to my house, and instead of bringing a bottle of wine or an appetizer, bring $20. And he did in Chicago, which is where he was before he went to the national group, and they raised about $80,000 in one night. So this was no small activity. It's something where it was very successful, and we're going to try and spread this around the country as well. And the community action network groups have a great opportunity to actually participate in this too. It's very easy to do. People come to the house, they come for dinner, you spend about 10 minutes talking about epilepsy, creating some awareness, and then just have fun the rest of the night. So it's something, again, that's easy to do and is going to get bigger as we go. Okay, so that's advancement. And then we get into the P of ASAP, which is participation. And this is really about participation in innovation and legislative advocacy. So with innovation, there's lots of things that are going on in the epilepsy arena now where people can actually participate and help scientists learn or get answers, especially for kids in this case. So the first one we have here is registries, including the Rare Epilepsy Network. And so basically signing up to be a part of that, allow scientists to study specific people that have epilepsy and learn about the more rare instances of that. And then genetic sequencing is a really big thing these days too. It's really going to change the way that people are often diagnosed with epilepsy, and scientists are now learning what medications work better for some different types of mutations for genetic sequencing, and doctors can then make a better decision about what medication might work for a specific patient. There's a handful of companies that actually participate in sequencing now. Lots of times there are ways to save money when getting the sequencing done, and companies can actually tell people about that. But so it's participating in that type of technology. And then it's getting involved with conferences like today. It's listening in, it's learning, it's educating yourself about things that are changing in the epilepsy arena, and even coming together as a group, doing these things, participating, it's traveling to a symposium together as a group. It's working together to make sure people attend. And then we have My Seizure Diary, which is an application, an online application or an app actually, and it tracks seizures and everything that goes around diet or medications, and really gives the person a good way to track and to share information with their medical team. And it just is a great way to actually list out what's happened either during seizure events or what's led up to that point. So another good way to participate. And then, of course, clinical trials. The only way that doctors and pharmaceutical companies can actually create new medications is if people participate in clinical trials. So that's a big one. Sometimes people see that as a risk, but when people do participate and are able to contribute to advancing a new medication, it's really something special, and it's the only way we're going to be able to create new medications. And then, of course, coming together as a group to advocate for public policy, which is really important at the local and the state level and the federal level. Telling stories or sending stories to local politicians or even federal politicians is a great way to just create awareness about epilepsy and to let them know, look, we need help. We need epilepsy awareness to be more seen throughout the country. We need laws to be passed for certain things, and so talking to legislators, going to see them at the state capitol or in DC are always great ways to get involved in the legislative process. So that is the framework for that, and the reason why we have a list of activities. Number one, it gives a common list of things that people can do around the country. So I often say, go through and pick one thing. Start with one thing, see how that goes, and if you feel you can do more, then do more. But that guides people so they don't feel like they have to go out and think of something on their own. And I get lots of emails and phone calls, and basically, how do I get involved? Well, here you go. Become a part of the Community Action Network. You can work with people in your local area, and you can do one of these activities. And so the way that starts is it starts with a leader, basically, and the local communities, within local communities, we ask that a volunteer steps forward to actually lead. And the great thing about this program is that there's support at a national level, and there's support at the local level as well with the staff person. Usually there's either a dedicated staff person who works with volunteers or the executive director oftentimes works with volunteers. So there's actually a person who can help plan and help with resources, with information, and so everyone works together to actually make sure this works. And again, so just to cover this piece again, it's about awareness education. It's about awareness of services and supportive care. It's about fundraising and it's participation in innovation and public policy advocacy. And those are the 4 pillars of the effort. And again, just the 270 communities around the country with 100,000 people or more. And what's interesting is that I'm finding that there are people in much smaller communities who want to get involved too. So it doesn't have to be a large city. If there's a group of 3, 4, 5 people who want to hold an event or participate in an activity in a small community, that's amazing. And I find that often small communities are much more willing to listen than large communities. I've seen that in Wisconsin. I've seen that in Oklahoma. I've seen it around the country where these are close-knit communities and they actually are very supportive about doing something. So it doesn't have to be a large community. So we move on to the next slide. So this is actually an example of how it's currently working in Oklahoma. And we have a leader in Oklahoma. We have an Oklahoma chapter there. And she has fully embraced the Community Action Network concept. And what she did is actually separate the state into 5 regions. And she has several groups in some cases in each region. And they are able to execute activities. They're able to have teams that walks. There's one group that actually held their own walk this past weekend. So when you actually spread a state like this, there's coverage in all parts of the state. So it actually helps bring awareness to the community about epilepsy. It lets them know that the foundation has a presence in the state. And these groups work together. And I always say too, these aren't set up to be support groups for individuals, for each other, but there's, by default, when people come together and share their common experiences, they act as a support group for each other, even though that's not the specific intent. But I know in Clearwater, we actually have a small group here that meets every other month or so, and we can't help but sharing doctor's information and medication information, and typically that happens after we talk about whatever activity we're going to participate in. But after that, we start talking about all the things that are involved in our lives about epilepsy and about seizures and how we can help each other. So that's actually a secondary thing that's really cool about these groups. But this is the most active state right now as far as Spokane goes, and it's set up, and it's a great way to actually set this up. So one of the real ways that the Community Action Network actually is effective is that there's a support system in place. And it starts at the local level, either with we have chapters and affiliates, and so the board and the staff are there to advise in certain cases. And specifically, when I support the CAN group, I'm working with an executive director in that specific state who actually helps me work with the group and to plan and to organize. And we help to provide ways to recruit and organize the group. So it's definitely feet on the ground that are doing this, and there's definitely a support system in place. And at the national level, the National Foundation, I'm the dedicated person who works on this every day. But then I have the support from multiple teams across the organization. The program team, I have support from the development team who helps to plan events and provides information and support to create ways to raise money. I have the communications team support, and it's all about coming together and making this ASAP model work. And then I'm also able to offer a monthly call for the leaders of the CAN who actually want to get together and share ideas and hear what's going on. And on every one of those calls, I walk through what's coming up as far as an activity, what people can participate in if they want to, and just get feedback about how the program's going in a specific location. It's a great way to share ideas. And then there's resources, there's documentation that gives ideas about how to make a CAN group work. There's an online resource center where there's information that's shared. Leaders can communicate with each other and review documents. And then I'm in the process of actually creating an online discussion board, which is specifically for all CAN groups. So it's the leaders, the volunteers, and this is going to be a really important way for people on the West Coast to share ideas with people on the East Coast and all the way in between. And it's actually going to be set up similar to almost like a Facebook page where people can ask a question or post a picture or post a video, and people can discuss things, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And it's a really powerful way to talk to people across the country who all are doing the same thing and working towards a common goal. And then we're in the process of setting up some type of yearly leader conference where successes are recognized and best practices are shared. This is all in person, and what the foundation is going to be working towards for the Community Action Network in the coming year. Are there new things coming out? Are there things that we've learned in the past that are going to help for the coming year? And it's a great opportunity for people from across the country to network with each other. And so we hope that will be around the same time as the National Walk this year coming in March. So we're trying to get that done. But it's a way to recognize successes within the Community Action Network and to just let people know that we appreciate what they're doing and how to make a bigger impact in their community. Okay. So the goal for 2016 is really to create more of these groups. It's to strengthen the groups that are existing, but it's also to create more groups across the country. And when we do this, we will make a bigger impact and we will save lives because the more people that know about epilepsy, the more funding that's raised to provide services and support those in the community, we will save lives. So what I typically do is, for those who are interested, we ask people to start a group. It can be 2 people, it could be 3 people, it could be 10 people. But it's identifying potential members who could join a group and then walking through that framework with them and seeing if they're interested. And then from there, it's about developing a plan for, say, the next 6 months and laying out maybe 1 activity or maybe 2 activities and actually committing to do those and working with either the volunteer liaison at the foundation or the executive director and myself, and basically saying these are the things that we think we can do in this time frame. And then it's planning and executing them. Okay, and this is just to illustrate that same sequence. Building a team for many people is hard. So what we typically do is say, even find 2 of your closest friends who you've been doing stuff with already. Bring them into it. Tell them what you're trying to do. And as you hold activities, it's a great way to actually recruit other people for your team at either walks or at awareness events or wherever you're out in the community. It's finding those who want to be a part of this mission. And it's amazing. What I've heard from people is when they're starting to do these activities now in the community, there are people who are coming up to them and saying, "Wow, I'm so glad you're out here. I have epilepsy. How do I get involved with you?" So it's a really great way to find more people. And so holding a first meeting is really important because it could be an hour, it could be half an hour, but it's getting these people together and explaining what you want to do and what you're trying to do. And it's listening to what their talents might be, how they can contribute to a specific activity, and then it's about setting those goals. It's identifying of the list of activities that are in the Community Action Network, which ones that people think they can actually do. And so this is about having fun as much as it is about creating awareness, because when people aren't having fun, then they're not going to continue to do it too. So it has to be something that people are interested in and that is relevant to them and is important to them. So then from there, even after an activity is held, it's about establishing regular meeting times. And by meeting, that could be in person, it could be an online meeting, whatever is convenient for members to actually to do, because we all have busy schedules, we all have families. Time is short, so it has to be done in a way that meets the needs of people while still letting them give back and contribute. And so in the end, what these groups also do is it's a great way to develop relationships in the community, at schools, at churches, at doctors' offices, and it really helps the foundation be more prevalent in the community and find ways to educate more in these specific community organizations. It's a great way to partner with businesses. Most people who get involved with these groups have friends who work at a company, or who, when they learn about the foundation and the mission, they tend to want to help. So it really extends the reach of helping the community in lots of different ways. Okay. So, I often say leadership is not a position or a title. It's an action. It's done by action and example. And I'll finish by really saying that the Community Action Network is one of the big things the foundation is really working hard on, because volunteers are often the lifeblood of expanding the services the foundation can provide. We can't do it without volunteers, and I think that people who are in a place where they can give back either through time or talent, or even creating fundraising opportunities, it's all important. And when we work together as teams, it's much easier to actually do this. It's much easier to change the community. It's much easier to create awareness. And then when those teams work together as teams and share, there's often nothing they can't do, because somebody might have a great example in Indiana, and they share it with somebody in Oregon, and then they're both doing the same thing, and they both create a lot more awareness, and they both create, a national event. So it's a way for the conversation to be changed and focused on epilepsy, and really it's all about helping people in the community, and that's what we're focusing on. That's my goal. Again, this is something that I do every day and that I have a passion for. It's personal, it's a mission, and it's something that I'm going to continue to work on until we have these communication networks across the country. So I thank you for your time and listening to this. And if there's any more questions, I'm sure you can follow up with either Jessica or even myself, and we can answer any questions that you might have. So with that, I'm not sure, Jessica, we open to any questions, or?
Does anyone have any? Yes, we have one question. 1 second.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Alexis. I'm one of the CAN leaders in Alaska.
Hey, Alexis.
I just have a question about recruiting new leaders, and if that requires like specific training, or if there's some kind of guidelines that we should follow to help grow our group.
Yeah. So when you grow your group, so right, there's two pieces. There is you can either create new groups with new leaders, or you can add members to your group. And depending on which area of the country you're in, some actually have some requirements to actually go through for people to become leaders. And it's a step-by-step of what epilepsy is. It's informing, and as people go through like an hour class maybe, to learn about epilepsy and to really learn about the program and to commit to actually doing an activity. And so they're a little bit different depending on what part of the country it's in right now for various reasons. But that actually will get much more tightened up and will be more common as the program develops. But I would say that it's good to have a little bit of training, just so we know who the person's about, as well as also educating them about the foundation and about what the program is. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for presenting today. That was fabulous. And now I'm going to turn
Okay,
it over
sorry.
to
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Mary Korok, and I am the Special Events Manager for Epilepsy Foundation Northwest. And I just wanted to kind of follow up on what you were saying earlier about, for instance, the walks that take place around the country. We sponsor, or we work with at least 14 communities. It's kind of grown over the years, but 14 communities throughout our region, which is Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. The communities range in size from little Hermiston, Hermiston, Oregon, and Ketchikan, Alaska, some very small, all the way up to Seattle, Tacoma, Spokane, Anchorage. We have 14 of these events. They take place in June, mostly the last 2 weekends in June. We will have information up on our website probably by mid-February. They're great opportunities for kind of grassroots community effort. We provide, obviously, the way to raise the money. We provide the software management for all of that, and we encourage people to get teams together in their communities to work with their employers. See if you can get teams from work. You can get teams from, you know, just your group of friends, whatever. There's a lot of ways, and it's a really, actually, a fun way to raise money. It doesn't necessarily, you know, just a $25 donation can make a big difference. And we're always looking for new communities who want to take this on, we still have our core group of communities, but if anybody would like to, has interest in starting a new walk in one of, you know, their towns, please get in touch with me. You can do that through our website. Also, the other thing that we offer is there are, as you saw in this presentation, several ways you can raise money in your communities, from lemonade stands to, you know, bake sales, you name it. We also have a lot of people who have partnered with their employers. For instance, we had, gosh, I'm trying to remember the name, but it was a discount shop grocery store who did it was Grocery Outlet, pardon me, that did a fundraiser for us recently. They just decided that they were going to name us the beneficiary. So I'm more than welcome to help, or I would more than welcome your inquiries about that. We can help you out a little bit, but those are pretty much community driven. And, you know, some take a little more work than others, but it's just kind of a matter of what your group, your little volunteer committee can do. But again, please feel free to get in touch with me. I'm now going to turn this over to Darrell Bell, who is our Alaska board member for the Epilepsy Foundation. Just 1 minute.
Hello, we're excited about what's going on here, and we want, I wanted to let you know that this day's activities are being recorded, and we have contacted a local radio station, Kotzebue, that's going to carry this for the villages throughout that region. And I would encourage the other regions throughout Alaska to feel free to contact me. I'll give you my cell phone. You can call, and I'll arrange, figure out how we can get this on other communication systems so that everyone can be educated or aware of what we presented today that may help somebody in their village that has epilepsy. My phone number is 907-297-8872, and you can call me and we'll make that arrangement. Let me also say, if you have an interest in, when we're trying to do this on bare bones budget, but a couple of us are working on a camp, trying to figure out how we could do a camp in Alaska that's similar to what we see down in Seattle. It may take us a while, but we want to get there. And so if any of you have special contacts with camps or facilities that allow us to use it on a bare bones budget and put something together to bring the youth and adults together with epilepsy, where we can get some of these, some nurses and some educated doctors in these fields to help and to let some of the youth have a camp experience that they may not have otherwise. Give me a call also. We want to build a program here. We're excited about what we're hearing, and I'm excited to have just joined the board. So thank you.
All right, thank you all for attending, and that concludes our conference for today. Thank you.